How about now? Can you hear me? Hello? All right, let's get started. All right, welcome back. All right, let's get started. Hello. You back? You back? Feedback? Can you hear me? Okay, good. Right, yeah, welcome everybody. Yeah, so I always go back to the syllabus just to go over where we've been, where we are, and where we're going. It's always good to take a look at the agenda. We did miss the Monday class, unfortunately, so we're slightly behind. That's fine. We did start the material earlier a little bit on Thursday, so hopefully today we'll be able to catch up. So today I'd like to go over the second assignment. I know you're still working on the first assignment. I believe most of you already done with the first assignment, and I see a lot of questions for the second assignment. So it looks like quite a few of you have already started the second assignment, which is great. Thank you. So yeah, but officially we'll get started today. I'll go over it. It does have a few sections of which you're only responsible for a few, not all of them. So I'll go over that and also get started on the actual formally on the material of HTML. Again, we did start a little bit on Thursday, but let's see if we can complete that today. Maybe it'll spill over to Monday, but hopefully we'll get most of it done today. Okay. Oh, okay, yeah. Any questions so far? Looks like first assignment has been pretty successful. Most of you looks like have been able to get it up and running locally, and looks like we're able to deploy to Netlify. I do point out to turn on, and I think that we do this in assignment too, where we want all the branches to deploy to Netlify. And so this first branch, I think you might be working already on main or master. But for the assignment 2, 3, 4, so forth, they're all going to be on separate branches, right? So branch A2, A3, A4, 4, assignments 2, 3, 4, so on and so forth. So as you deploy these to different branches in GitHub, Netlify will automatically create a URL for every single different branch. So it'll be your original URL for your wherever it's running on Netlify, and then you just add A2 dash dash to see the branch A2, or A3 dash dash to branch A3, and so on and so forth. So you can submit each branch individually, so that the TAs can easily grade you on that particular assignment, and you can keep working on the next assignment without necessarily waiting on the grade for the previous one. All right. So yeah, so let's see real quick the upcoming assignments. Right, so this week, as the syllabus says, we're still working on through HTML. Let's look at the second assignment. So all assignments from now on, right, all the way to the end of the semester, are going to have 3 parts, okay, of which you're responsible for the first 2. The third part is specifically for graduate students, right? Although if you want, you can also work on that part. Explore just a few other concepts, some of them more advanced concepts, right? If you want to play around with it, that's fine. We're not going to grade you on it, but if you have a light semester, maybe you might want to explore a little further. But the first 2 parts, the first one is a lab, right? And it's what it sounds like, right? It's just lots of different exercises, right, to just get you up to speed with certain skills, right? Can you put a heading? Can you put a paragraph? Can you make a list? Can you make tables, right? Can you import an image? Can you display certain things on the screen? Yes. And they're mostly, unrelated one from another. They're mostly, throwaway, individual exercises just for targeting a specific skill, right? You're going to be working on in the same project that we created in the first assignment, right? The Twitter React app. But then, it asks you how to create a couple of headings, of different sizes, big heading or smaller heading, a couple of paragraphs. Then it works through some different types of lists, ordered list, unordered list with bullets and with numerical lists. Then it works through a couple of tables on how to create, headings and footers and columns and rows, how to span across rows, how to span across columns. So most of these exercises are plainly just copy paste from the code we give you, and you just paste it on your on the document we tell you, and you have to verify that it renders as expected. Okay, it doesn't have to look identical. Mine might be a little more bolder than yours, but fairly close. Okay. Also, a lot of this content that we ask you to copy and paste has a documentation right next to it. You don't have to copy the documentation; just the code is enough. Right? But nevertheless, make an effort to read through the entire document. I see some of you just copy pasting blindly, right, into the documents, right? And you might run into an issue where you maybe forgot to copy a few things or whatnot, and it's broken. Just don't blindly copy paste, right? So try to go through the exercise and try to understand what each one of these skills are. All right. The intention is for you to, we're hand holding you in this first part, okay, so that you acquire the skills to later on be able to do it on your own, right? And the second part of this assignment asks you, now that you've had a chance to practice these skills, apply them to build something, right? That we won't handhold you. We'll tell you it has to look like this, okay? And then you have to choose whether you're going to use a table, whether you're going to use a list, a paragraph, a heading, whatnot, to make it look the way it looks supposed to look. Okay. So yeah, a couple of exercises. I'm working with images, whether images that we can pull off from the web, or images that you can download and post it yourself on your website, right? So we'll ask you to download a couple of things. Working with form tags. There was a question on Piazza about this, whether we should use forms or not. So the proper syntax is to use the form tag, right? So the form elements allow you to create user interfaces for folks to enter data, right? Input fields, drop downs, text area, radio buttons, checkboxes, and whatnot. Yes. And the proper syntax is to put all these elements, right, inside a outer form element. Okay. And so the form element has some default behaviors that we have to just be aware of, right? You have to be a little bit careful. For instance, one of the behaviors is that if you can put buttons here to submit the form, right? You can put a reset button, a submit button, right, and just a plain old button. And the default behavior is that if you click one of those buttons, the form is designed, the browser will grab all the data that you enter in the fields, in these fields, and it will send it over to some place where you can tell it. You can specify here. You can specify send this data to some server. Okay, this is a behavior that is legacy behavior that we're not going to be using. Right, we're going to be overriding that behavior. We don't want that behavior. Okay. So there's a couple of ways of not having that behavior. One of them is just to not have the form element at all. Okay. And instead we use the JavaScript to do this, right? Instead of the button submitting the form and sending it over, instead is going to be handled by us through some JavaScript, right? That's going to listen for those clicks, and then we're going to parse the content. We're going to verify certain things, right? Make sure that some dates in the correct range. And running some validation locally, right? And when everything's okay, right, we're gonna create a JSON object, right, and then send it over to the server. We're gonna do that ourselves programmatically. So we're not gonna be using the default behavior of browsers, so parsing the data and sending it over. So again, two ways to disable the default behavior is to just not use the form at all, and that's fine, even though it's syntactically incorrect. It's fine. You know, you're not gonna the browser's not gonna yell at you, right? And we're certainly not. We're not gonna penalize you. Or use the form element, and just be careful that when all your buttons, when you put a button here, the default behavior is that these buttons will submit the form. Okay, so we can turn that off by saying that these buttons are plain buttons. Okay, these are not submit buttons. They should not be submitted. I'll give you an example today. We'll go over that. And you can very easily say, button type equal button. Okay, and that automatically disables the default behavior of submitting it. Right. So we'll demonstrate that today for you. But yeah, just be careful. And it won't matter quite yet, not until we get to like in 2 weeks. Then it will matter whether these forms are submitted or not. And it might be a little frustrating, the default behavior. Well, we'll come back to it a little later. But yeah, I saw a couple of questions back and forth on Piazza. I just want to address those. Yeah, there's a whole bunch of input fields. These are just for you to practice different input fields, for dates and range, sliders and emails, numbers, and text area. Just for you to do practice, okay? And yeah, so it might be a good idea for me to just preemptively put here type equal button so that you don't, it doesn't behave the default, whether you go form or not, right? If we don't want the submission. Drop downs, radio buttons, check boxes. So for you to practice, then anchors are going to allow us to navigate between pages, right? Hyperlinks, if you click on them, it just navigates to a different web page, and just several exercises for that. And we ask you to do that under labs, a directory called labs, and then for assignment 2, assignment 3, assignment 4, right? There will be different labs for each assignment. Okay. All right. So yeah, so that's for you to practice and gather some skills and some confidence on how to draw stuff on the screen. Okay. So now we ask you to then apply what you've just learned. Right? Now you know how to create hyperlinks, you know how to create lists, you know how to create tables, right? Headings and paragraphs and all that. So we ask you, okay, well, let's start. Let's, under a new directory called Twitter, create a page called navigation.html that has a whole bunch of hyperlinks that allow you to navigate different places, right? On the to this new Twitter application, and it should look like this. Right, this navigation.html should look like this. Okay, so browser should render. There were a couple questions on Piazza that I saw a lot of folks creating the whole table. Right, I saw a lot of people creating the whole, so there was a little confusion there. The browser should render this, what you see here. Right, it's just a bulleted list of hyperlinks that if you click on that link, they should navigate you to different pages. Yes. Right. Now we're not going to build all the pages this assignment, right? This assignment, I believe the only ones that you need to build are maybe Explore, maybe, and Profile. I think those are the two that we ask you to do this assignment. We'll ask you to create the other web pages later in later assignments. Yes. So even though these hyperlinks are going to be referencing all these documents don't necessarily all have to exist. Okay. Even though they point to them, they might not necessarily be there, right? So I think we just ask you to do maybe Explore.html and Profile.html, maybe just those two. I don't remember. Also, at the root of the public directory in the index.html, we do ask you to please create links to all the labs, right? This is kind of like the landing page that TAs are going to see first, right? So that they're going to be able to navigate to all your different labs throughout the semester. So lab 1, lab 2, lab 3, and so forth. So here we create the first link to the second assignment, this assignment, and then next week you'll do assignment 3, and then assignment 4, and so on and so forth. You'll be adding here more links to those assignments. Yeah, so here's the first screen that we ask you to build. Well, other than obviously navigation.html, we ask you to build home.html, that it should look like this on the right-hand side. It should look like, you know, heading at the top, that this is Twitter, the home screen, you know, choose an image, you know, some avatar of yours, whatever. Then the text area, a drop down that says, you know, everyone can reply, people can follow. So the drop down that has those options. Then a horizontal bar, which I never added to it. It's the HR element. It's the HR element will create this horizontal groove going across, which is not in the documentation. Then a button for uploading an image, a tweet button, and then a couple of tweets, right? And the tweets have a hyperlink, and so presumably this is kind of like the timeline, you know, in a social network, you know, timeline that shows all the posts, you know, on Facebook or Instagram or whatever. You know, it's your timeline as you scroll through all these, right? And each one has a link to the user, presumably their profile, perhaps, and you know, an image that represents the avatar for that particular person, their handle, right, at Alice or at whatever, you know, how long ago was this posted? 2 hours ago, and then some blurb. And then down below, some statistics, right? How many people have replied to this? How many people have retweeted this? How many have liked it, shared, and whatnot, okay? So you're free to put any content here. You know, keep it clean, keep it PG-13. But put whatever content you want, whatever image, you choose your own names, okay? Make it yours, right? It doesn't have to look identical to this, right? I believe we asked you to do these two, plus a couple more on your own. So think of something, you know, some topic of interest to you, and just, you know, create a couple of tweets. Yes. Then to practice tweet screen. We also ask you to create a profile screen where you can change your name, you can change your image, the heading at the top, the banner. Obviously, we don't know how to do that yet, right? We don't have any JavaScript. We don't have any way to actually change the data, right? Nevertheless, we're gonna get started creating the profile screen, right? With some default image, some default banner. Again, make it look with your own images, with your own thumbnail, right, and your own bio and your own handle. So make it yours, right? So customize it. Yes.
Wait, we have to create more like tweets than just the two?
I believe it asks you to do 4, including using our below the tweet add yada yada yada. Instead of Alice, repeat to create second tweet with slightly different blah 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 blah. Maybe not. I thought maybe I removed it. Yeah, I guess those two are enough. So yeah, so you have the profile that shows a little bit about yourself. And then when you click on the edit profile, it takes you to a different screen called edit profile.html that allows you to edit your information. Maybe upload a different banner, upload a different thumbnail, right? Change your handle, change your bio, okay? And so create that. And then the last section, so that's the tweeter section, right? And so all assignments are going to look like this. They're going to be 3 sections, right? The labs, the tweeter, and then a challenge section. The challenge section is for graduate students, okay? And you know, you're not required to work on the challenge at all, right? We're not going to grade you. You're welcome to try and play around with it, but you're not required at all. We're not going to grade you. We're not going to penalize you for going there, but you're welcome to play around there. So the Tweeter application, we're going to work on that throughout the entire semester. Right? So today we're going to use HTML to add content and create the some of the layout, some of the that we're using certain forms and whatnot, right? Next week, we'll use CSS to make it look prettier, right? More presentable, right? We'll learn how to style things, add some color, different fonts, right? Maybe rounded corners, and so forth. So that's next week, right? And then as we progress, we're gonna add JavaScript so we can do some dynamic content. We can actually upload images, handle when you submit a form, right? And send data to some server. So as we progress, each assignment will modify a few things from the previous assignment, right? Add a new skill, and then move forward throughout the entire semester. Okay. So you'll see how to create an application, one particular application, and the intent is that then you would feel confident enough to then create your own application, right, of your choice. Okay, with some team members, you can choose your own topic and build something from scratch on your own. All right, that's the intent, right? In this one, we tell you how to create one, a specific assignment, a specific project, but then you can create your own. Everybody good? All right, so that's the second assignment. So there's obviously there's a few slides that talk about the HTML. So instead of going through the slides, which I believe we went through it a little bit last week, instead I'm just going to do some live coding and go through each one of the elements, see how they could be used for creating some content. Okay. Yes.
So just to verify, because we're going to be using this project over the next couple of weeks, right? Just like as
Yes.
we build up. So I didn't add any form elements into mine. Is that gonna am I gonna need to go back and edit that, even though it's fine for this assignment in the future?
In which assignment?
In assignment 2.
Assignment 2.
I didn't use forms. I just used.
Oh yeah, we're not going to use it at all, so that's fine. Yeah,
Okay.
we're not going to need it at all.
Okay.
Yeah.
Thank you.
And the discussion in Piazza was, should I be using forms? Should I not be using form? And I think I answered that it doesn't really matter. Just be careful if you do use it. The default behavior is that it submits, right, and it refreshes the screen, which is a pain if you're using JavaScript, because you'll lose any data structures that you might have declared, any variables that you might have declared. When you refresh, you lose all that, right? And that can create some frustration if you don't know, right? So you either don't use a form or make sure that the buttons are type button. Okay, because otherwise, by default, it submits the form and it refreshes the screen, which is can be a pain. Okay. All right, so let's take a look at where we left off in the project. Let's see. Let's take a look at here in the index screen. You might get this message about ESLint. ESLint is a linter. It's an application that makes sure that your code follows certain standards. So many tabs, white spaces, that you use the correct quotations and whatnot. We're not going to deal with that. We do cover it in software engineering and whatnot to do best practices. We're not going to be using it in this class, so you can just turn it off. I'm just going to turn it off. Disable ESLint so it doesn't bug me all the time. Okay, so let's see. Right, so if we run this, we can start. It will bring up the default screen that we installed earlier. There it is, right? There's our default landing page, and the way it works is that you see this public directory. The name public is a very standard name that servers use to indicate that anything that you put in there, the server will serve or make available to the rest of the world. So everybody who can access this server, if they know the IP address or the name of the server, whatever's in the public directory is mapped to the slash, right? So this slash here, this first slash here, right, is mapped to the physical location of that public directory, right, on the file system. Okay, so whatever you put in there, you can retrieve. So for instance, if you know the name here, logo 192, and you know the name of our file, right, and you ask for that particular file, it'll download that file and it'll show you. Okay, whatever file you put in there, And if you put any file, even if it's a text file, hello.text, hello world. Save that, and you know that there's a file called hello.text, right? It'll download that document, right, and it'll show you. Make sense? Right. So that's why it's called public. Meaning, careful. If you want people to have access to anything, just drop it in there. If they know what the file name is, right, they can retrieve it. And anything outside of the public directory is not public. Okay. Not quite sure. Not quite exactly. So there's some magic here. You have this index document, right? And notice that there's no content here. There's almost nothing in here. The only thing in here is this div with a root. See that? So you might question as well, where is that rotating image? Where is that text here? What does it say? Edit source blah blah blah. Where is that? I don't see that anywhere here. So what's happening? There's a little magic here that's occurring. Is that under the source directory, and there is some JavaScript that is programmatically grabbing this root, like grabbing that root and injecting, right, and drawing programmatically into that div, right? And so the entry point to this set of code is under the index.js, and here's where the magic occurs, right? Notice that it's grabbing the root directly, the root element there. See, document.getElement by ID, right? That's JavaScript, okay? That is what it's doing is that it's looking at the DOM. Remember we talked about the DOM last week, right? This is the document object model, right? It's a data structure that represents the document that is being rendered. Yes, on the left-hand side. And we talked about there being a root HTML document element, and then two sub elements, right? The head and the body, and then all the content was in the body, right? And so all this is the result of having parsed this index document, right? This index document, right? This HTML, this head, right? All this, and the body. There it is. See that body? The body. We have a no script. We have a div. And there it is. See that? It has the no script. Here's the div with the root. Okay. But our document, our HTML ASCII file, says that there's nothing in that root div, right? But the DOM begs to differ. It says no. There's a whole bunch of stuff in there. There's a div class app. There's a header. There's an image. There's a paragraph, right? There's a hyperlink. But none of that is here. See that? Right? So the magic, what's happening is that under the source directory, we have JavaScript, which is written using the React.js library, right? Which we're going to play around in a couple of weeks, right? And what the magic is that it uses very low level JavaScript to document. Document means it's a reference to that DOM, right? To that data structure, right? This document is a global variable in JavaScript browsers that is a reference to this data structure, right? This data structure, I can access it, I can manipulate it using the document API, right? It's a reference to the DOM. And you can, for instance, retrieve any sub-elements, right? You can search the tree, go find me some element whose ID is root, which happens to be this element right here. See that? Okay. And what does it do? Well, the root does a root.render. Now we are in React.js API. Right? The React.js API says, okay, once I have a reference to the DOM, I can forget about the DOM. I'll never use the DOM ever again. Okay. React.js is a layer of abstraction on top of the DOM, so that you don't actually have to use the DOM. Right? It converts this very high level way of thinking about functions and modules and components, right? Component-based development, and it translates everything to low-level document whatever, right? But we don't want to deal with all the low-level stuff. We want to be way up here, right? Eventually, when we get to React. So what does it do? It does a root. Well, render the following. Render this. Never mind the strict. Never mind the strict. It's rendering this app element that looks like HTML, but it's not. It looks like HTML, but it's not quite. It's really this app that is being imported from this other file, app, right, which just happens to be this app.js. Right? So if we go in there, there's app.js, And app.js is a plain old JavaScript function, right? That happens to have the same name. See that app has exactly the same name as the file, and it has the same name as the elements that is being injected in there. See that? Right. So this renders whatever this returns. Okay. So this root.render renders whatever that function returns. What does it return? Oh, it returns a div with a class name app. See that? There's the content. There it is. All this content is all the stuff that we see here. See that? Right? It's just that this class app. It's this one over here with this funny looking class name. We have a header, we have an image, we have a paragraph, we have a hyperlink. Exactly what we see here: the header, the image, the paragraph, the hyperlink. See that? Okay. So basically, React.js, the only thing React.js is a whole bunch of functions that call other functions that call other functions, right? And then each function just returns whatever HTML you want to render on the screen. That's all it is, right? That's all React.js is a transformation function, right? That you give it some data, some object with arrays and a whole bunch of data, and it churns through that data and it spits out HTML. See that? Right? It converts data. Right? It could be a list of courses, a list of quizzes, a list of whatever. Okay, and then it computes through a whole bunch of functions that call other functions that call other functions. But the resulting thing that comes back is calculated HTML. Right, where you can look through things, you have a whole bunch of if statements and branching and switch statements, right? And so it applies that logic to generate dynamic HTML. Make sense? Yes.
So if you already have elements in your index HTML under that ID root,
yeah,
can you specify in JavaScript what order the elements appear in, where it's injected?
Oh, absolutely. You have total control of how things appear. Absolutely. For now, we're gonna turn off React.js. Right, so we're gonna just stay with just plain old HTML. So the low level, the really low level stuff. Okay, just so that we learn, the multiplication tables and the addition tables, and then later on we'll just give you the calculator. Okay, but we need to learn how to add and subtract, before we give you the calculator. All right. So we'll spend a couple weeks with the low level stuff, right? So that then we can, put the layer of abstraction on top of it. Right, and kind of forget about the low-level things. Yes, right. That's the point. Okay, so yeah, so we're going to abandon this for now. We're going to abandon this. So one of the things that we're going to do is that back in the HTML document here, we're going to say, well, I know React.js is taking over that root element. Yes, so we're just going to blow it away for now. We'll come back in a couple of weeks and we'll put it back. Right, but it's gone. So that if I go here, notice that it's not rendering anything anymore. Right, it's not rendering anything anymore. Okay, and a few other things. It's still index.js is still running. So this index.js is still trying to take over it, but it can't find the root anymore. It says, I don't have the root. I can't. There's nowhere for me to render this. Right, but it's still rendering a few things. It's rendering this index.css file, right, which establishes a couple of fonts. It establishes a few other styling things. So we're going to turn that off too. Okay, we don't want to style anything for now because we want to learn about CSS first, right? Before using any styling of their own. Okay. Right? So going back to index.html, what is this rendering? It's not rendering anything, right? That the no script tag there only renders if you turn off JavaScript, which we haven't. Right, it's telling you, sorry, I can't render because you don't have JavaScript enabled, right? But we do have JavaScript enabled, so it's not doing anything. Okay? So yeah, it's blank. So now I can go back in and start saying, h1, hello world. Right, and there it is, hello world. Okay, and it renders in its default styling. Right, it's just plain old black and white. Okay, and using the default fonts of Times New Roman. Okay, this is the default bare bones things that the browser wants to do. Okay, because we're ignoring React.js for now. Everybody good? All right, so let's practice HTML by building something. Let's build this page. Let's build this page, and the assignment asks you to build Twitter. Okay, but here in class, we're going to do something else. Same skills, right? But we're building something else. You should be able to transfer it over, right, as you go through this. But let's see. So this page has looks like it has a couple of columns, right? It has this left-hand side navigational thing that allows you maybe to navigate across canvas, right? So this is kind of like a canvas navigator. This is another navigation sidebar. Looks like allows you to navigate throughout the course, right? This particular, so we'll call it maybe a course navigator. Then in the middle here, we have kind of like different modules, kind of like a list of modules, right? And then each module looks like it has a list of hyperlinks or things, right? It has of contents, right? Some of them are assignments, some of them are headers, but it's a kind of like a list of lists, kind of like a nested list where you have a list of modules, right? You have a whole bunch of modules, and then each module in turn has a whole bunch of a list embedded inside. Yes. So let's learn how we might implement something like this. So this will give us a chance to play around with tables, with hyperlinks, headings. Okay. And so then we'll let's learn also about maybe an account where we might want to be able to edit a profile. So this will give us a chance to maybe play around with forms and text areas, and then maybe we can also play around with implementing the grades, right? The grades, and this will give us a chance to play around with tables and rows and columns and footers and things like that. Okay. All right. So let's see. Let's go back here, and let's start off. Okay? So for instance, we might it's a good practice, right? Whenever you're gonna tackle something fairly complex, to maybe create a directory and just stay within that directory so that you don't litter the entire namespace, right? So let's create a directory here. We're going to build Canvas. The assignment, I think, asks you to create a directory to create Twitter, okay? And then do all your Twitter stuff in there. I think it asks you to create another directory for the labs, right? And then maybe under each lab, under the labs, create different directories for each of the assignments, like A2, A3, and so on and so forth. So yeah, so just to be organized, right? So create different directories for these things. Okay? And then use the index page, right? Kind of to use it like an index, like a book index, right? At the end of the book, there's like an index that tells you how to navigate through the book, telling you where to find things, right? So that's what the name here, index.html. It's kind of like it's a standard name, index.html. That the intent is to give you access to the rest of the document, or the rest of the directory, or the rest of the website. Okay, that's the intent. So for instance, let's create, so each directory, for instance, is very common to put an index inside of each directory, right? So for instance, let's create another index document here. It's empty. I'll say yes, always add it to my hit. And in here, we could put maybe our first H1 and say this is Canvas. Okay. And so how would we navigate to that? Well, we can use, we know where it is. It's under a new directory called Canvas and called index.html. So I should be able to download it and I see it. Very good. Okay. And so yeah, if I know where things are, certainly I can just type it out and I retrieve it. But notice what happens if I remove the index. I only type Canvas. See that? I still get the index.html. See that? Right? That is a default configuration for all servers. That if you don't specify which document you want, you don't remember the name of the document, what you will get by default is the index document, index.html. Right? And you can configure this to be different things. Some people configure it to be home.html, right, or begin.html, or whatever. Right? But by default, servers are configured so that if you don't specify the file, you don't remember, well, you at least will get the index.html. Okay. And it's extremely convenient here, right? If I don't specify the local host 3000, right? What do I get? I get that public index.html. See that? I didn't specify it. So what I'm getting is this guy right here, this index at the top of the directory, public directory. See that? Right? So I'm getting this hello. So this root index.html is a very convenient place to put links to everywhere else, right? That I can navigate different places. So for instance, I might put here a link, a hyperlink to my brand new Canvas index file, right? So I can go to Canvas. Yeah, so if I refresh, there it is, my Canvas. So that if I click on it, I can navigate to my Canvas new web page for Canvas. Make sense? So it's very convenient to put in the index and the root index access to the rest of the website. Okay, and I believe the assignment asks you to do that. Right? It asks you that in this root index.html, please put hyperlinks to all your labs, right? You know, to lab 1, lab 2, and so on and so forth for each one of the assignments, so that the TA, when they come to the root, right, they can quickly just go and look at all the different labs that you've worked on, and also links to your Twitter application as you work through this. Okay, right? Okay, and it's convenient because notice that I didn't have to type in any content, right? And it already brings up that root, right? So I don't have to remember the name of anything, right? And it allows me to navigate. All right, so Canvas. So what's in Canvas? So Canvas contains what? Contains this navigator on the left side. So we'll call it maybe the course navigator. Okay. So maybe in Canvas. So it's a good idea to logically break out whatever you're building, right? And that's what HTML is for, right? To logically create a structure of the document, okay? And add most of the content, not to worry about the styling too much, you know, what fonts to use, what colors am I using, whatnot. That's the responsibility of CSS, right? That we'll play around with next week, okay? The HTML is mostly to create a logical structure of your content, right? So for instance, here you have a H2, we'll call it, this is the course navigator, right? And so this should render with a smaller font, right? So this one here. There it is, course navigator. And we have and then later on, we're going to have another H2, which is going to be, oh, no, sorry, this is the Canvas navigator, right? Canvas navigator, and this will be the course navigator. Right, refresh, there's a main section and then 2 subsections. And then we have on the right-hand side, we have the course content. So maybe we'll call it the course content. So course content. And on the right-hand side, you know, maybe we'll just have kind of like a sidebar. Maybe we'll call it sidebar. Okay, so we'll have that. We have those 4 sections. Okay. And notice that I use different headings so that it becomes smaller and smaller and smaller as they are one instead of the other. Okay, so let's see. And so what do we have here? So this seems to be kind of like a list of hyperlinks. Okay, that if I click on them, presumably they're going to navigate different places. Right? So again, structurally or logically, here we have a list of something. You know, whether I want it to be ordered or unordered, maybe I want it bulleted or I want numbers, I could use either use the UL element or the OL element for ordered and unordered. Here I don't really care because I don't really want bullets and I don't really want numbers, right? So if I don't really care, it's more common to just use UL. By default, it'll add bullets. But next week, we'll use CSS to turn off those bullets, right? Change the look and feel a little bit, okay? But for now, we'll stick to the default behavior, right? So what do we have here? We have kind of like a link to Northeastern, right? And a few things here. We have a link to account. We have a dashboard. We have courses. calendar, inbox. Okay. And if we re-render this, there's our list using the default styling of just bulleted lists. And next week, using CSS, we're going to say, well, we don't really like bullets. We'll turn that off. Right. Also notice that there's a large padding here. We can turn that off also with CSS. Right. Again, that's next week. Then for the course navigator, we have what? We have home, modules, Piazza, Zoom, yada yada yada, a whole bunch of stuff here, right? So let's create another bullet list here. This will be UL, LI, and this will be home. And let's just copy paste some of those. So we have home, we have modules, we have Piazza, we have Zoom. We have assignments, and we have quizzes, and we'll do one more grades. All right, and that renders as a list. Very good. And these presumably would be hyperlinks to places. So, for instance, perhaps the account will allow me to edit my profile. Okay, so maybe. Although the actual implementation is that it goes to account, and then from account you go to profile. Let's simplify it. I click on the account, I'll go to my account.html for editing, right? For editing my profile. So let's create an account here. So this would be account.html, and this would be maybe h1. This is a account, and then from index here, I want to be able to navigate there. So we can create a hyperlink that allows me to navigate there, right? So I can wrap this inside of a href of a hyperlink and say that I want to navigate to the account. So this creates a hyperlink that says that if you click on account, right, I will replace your current document with another document. All right, I'll dump the current document, I'll go fetch that other document, and I'll render that other document instead. Yes. So let's do that. For instance, if I refresh, right, this is now a hyperlink. See that? It's underlined. It's blue. Again, this is all default styling, which next week we can change the look and feel as we want it. But that's not HTML. That's it. So if I click on account, notice that there is the URL changes at the top, and it replaces the current document for that new document. And the browser knows about history. Right, so it knows that it has a stack data structure, right? That it remembers, right, what documents I've visited, so I can go back or I can go forward in this stack. So I can go back or forward. Very good. Very good. Okay, so let's see. Maybe one of the links should be syllabus. How's that? C11. And maybe we can create the syllabus. We can create maybe the syllabus here. HTML syllabus. We call this syllabus H1. One of the first things that you should do always is play around with the navigation and just to check make sure that all the navigation makes sense. Even though you might not have all the content for all these screens yet, but it's a good way to just prototype and just check to see, does the navigation make sense, right? Of going different screens and each screen having its own particular job. So here's my syllabus, here's to edit my account, right? And maybe grades. So let's look at the grades. For instance, this might be grades. H1 grades, and then in the index here on the grades, we can hyperlink to grades. So href grades. And refresh. So if I click on grades, it goes to the grades. Very good. All right. All right. So let's first play around with the syllabus. So in the syllabus, it should look perhaps something like this. We have headings at the top, we have paragraphs, we have we have embedded tables, we have all sorts of things, right? So let's play around with the syllabus. So the syllabus, in the syllabus, we might have maybe instead of syllabus, the name of the course. We might have another sub heading in there that says CS4500 Spring 2023, and then we might have several other sub titles, right? Like course goals. So notice that I've been adding all these elements, right? Notice if I did not have any of these headings, right? If I didn't have any of this, right? Even though I'm putting new lines and tabs and whatnot, right? The browser completely would ignore all that, right? So if I go here and I refresh, notice that even though I put everything in separate lines, even though I have my tabbing, the browser couldn't care less for that, right? So my browser by default ignores any extra spaces, any new additional tabs, any additional new lines. Those are entirely ignored, right? The only thing that it does not ignore is the spacing between the words. Right? So notice that it does maintain the single space between the words. It just collapses any extra spaces, any extra new white spaces into a single space between words. Yes. Right. Also, if I keep adding content, so let me add some of this paragraph in here, just to make a point. If I go back and I render this, again, it's all a run-on, right? No spaces, no anything. But notice what it's using a strategy called inline. Notice that if I make this a little bigger, right, it expands to take up the width of whatever I give it, right? And so it renders from left to right, and when there's no more space, it just wraps. See that? And then it keeps going from left to right until there's no more space, and then it wraps. So that strategy is called inline rendering. Okay. It just renders from left to right, top to bottom, and there's no more space, right? It breaks the line and goes into the next line. Yes, that's called inline. And different elements behave using inline, and some elements don't behave using inline. Some other elements behave like blocks, like for instance, the H1. So H1 is a block element. If I refresh, it behaves differently, right? It breaks the page vertically, right? As opposed to moving from left to right horizontally, it adds vertical spacing. If you take a look at it, if you inspect it, you'll notice that it's taking up the entire width of the screen, right? And whatever's left over, right, it just forces it to wrap and take up the next line. See that? That behavior is called block, right? Block rendering. And these are the two most primitive or most common, most basic ways that the browser decides what should appear where on the screen. Okay, and you should learn. We're going to be learning that some elements behave like inline, and some elements behave like blocks. Right. So all the headings behave like blocks. Okay, all the paragraphs behave like blocks. ULs behave like blocks. But some of them don't. Some of them don't. So for instance, if I go here and I add here a bold, right? And I add this inside of a bold tag here, and I render this, you'll notice that this is indeed bold. See that? It's bolded, but it stays in line with the rest of the content. It didn't add any extra space, any vertical spacing. Yes? Right? Not so if I say this one over here and I say H2. See that? Even though I'm putting it as part of the rest of the content, look what happens. It breaks it out, right? And it takes up the whole screen, yes, and it adds vertical spacing. Right? So we say that B is an inline element, whereas H2 is a block element. Everybody good? Okay. And there's a whole bunch of elements that only behave one way or the other. For instance, all input fields. So if I put an input field somewhere in here, like inside, and I refresh, notice that inline, right? That input fields behave inline. See that? Okay, which is a pain because most of the forms when we build it, it would be nice if they all would render nicely in a block, right, top to bottom, right? So if we don't like the default behavior, we have to explicitly tell it, hey, stop behaving like inline. Please behave like a block. Okay, and we can do that using CSS. CSS basically overrides all the default styling. Yes.
Are divs like block?
Exactly. So the divs are the most basic block elements. Yeah, and I was going to go there. I'll be there in a second. So yeah. So notice that varies here. Even if I explicitly add spacing, right? Right. It just keeps rendering it inline, right? It just ignores any vertical spacing that I add. Okay. All right. Right. So let's keep going. Let's say that I have other things that I add here or other paragraphs. More paragraphs, and maybe some more paragraphs. And a few more paragraphs. But if I render this, notice that it is completely ignoring the fact that I added the extra spacing, right? It's just one big run-on after another. Right? So I want this to behave like the blocks, not like inlines, right? I want these paragraphs to behave like individual block elements, right? So one way that I can do that is that to explicitly add the styling of paragraphs. I want these to behave like paragraphs, right? So if I re-render, notice that now, right, my web technology, all the way up to here, now it becomes its own thing and breaks, right, this content, this lecture here used to be here, right? And because I added the paragraph, I said, no, this should behave like a block. The content, it adds the vertical spacing. Inside, everything still behaves inline, right? But respect to all the other elements, right, it behaves like a block. Right? All the internal stuff is still inline, but it adds spacing above and below. I can keep doing that. I can also say that this is also a paragraph. And so I can render. Notice that now lectures also is its own paragraph. See that? Yes.
As far as like code styling, is there like a preferred method of putting like a whole paragraph in your code so that's not just like running off the side?
Yeah, so typically there's a, which I turned off the linter, but usually the linter will complain and say all text should not be longer than 80 characters, and you can tell it'll fix my file, right? And it'll cut off everything at 80 characters, and yes, it will wrap nicely, so it makes it much easier to read.
So I guess I was wondering like what I was finding when I was using I think paragraph and then also in something like the text input stuff, if I manually did like a new line, it would put those new lines in my like HTML when it rendered. Like, is there a way to avoid that? That makes sense. Like, I would get those new lines like where I didn't want them.
You should not get the new lines. Are you adding a BR maybe at the end or something, or is it automatically adding some styling?
Yeah.
Maybe you need to look at the raw HTML.
Okay.
Maybe you're using some WYSIWYG editor or something. I don't know.
I don't think so.
Yeah, we can take a look at it. Sure. So paragraph is again another block element. So we saw right now we've seen all the headings are block elements. The paragraph is a block element. But sometimes you don't want something to just be so. For instance, these two block elements. Sometimes these specific block elements not only do they break up the screen vertically, but they also add additional styling. Right? So for instance, the headings make the fonts bigger and bolder and whatnot, yes, and also adds a lot of padding above and below, yes. Right? Also, the paragraph does the same thing. It doesn't change the inner styling, but it does add some spacing above and below, yes. Sometimes you just want to break up content logically, vertically, but don't add any additional styling. You just want to break it up logically, vertically. Okay, so for instance, these assignments, we might still use paragraph, but I just want to introduce you to a generic block element, div. Okay, div is a block element that the only thing it does is that it breaks up the screen vertically, but it doesn't add any extra spacing, any extra styling, any extra font size, or anything like that, like the H elements or the paragraph elements, right? It just only does that. It just breaks up the content vertically. Right? So let's add that. So div, kind of like a divider. And if we go down here and I refresh, notice now that this is separate from this. See that? Before they were together. Right? If I comment this out again, you notice that they used to be one thing. Right? This used to be one thing. So students here just followed the other one here. See that? But if I put back the divs, you notice that now students is broken into a separate line. See that? Right. So that's the only thing that divs does. It adds the additional vertical spacing, and it's a generic way to just collectively say something or style or manipulate that particular element. Everybody good? Okay. Another common element that is used just like the div is a generic block element. That the only thing that breaks up things vertically. There is also a generic equivalent, generic inline element. Okay, notice that B is not generic because not only does it is inline, but it manipulates the look and feel. Right, it makes it bold. Right, there's a whole bunch of other ones. Right, I could make this underline. Right, it's underline. And so for instance, that becomes underline. See that? It's inline. It doesn't add any vertical spacing. It flows with the content, but it specifies some styling. But sometimes you want to generically grab something, right? And just want to say, well, I want to say something about this content here. And something about consists of building complete, right? If I go here, there it is, consists building complete. See that? If I refresh, it didn't do anything. It looks just the same. See that? And that's the point. Right? That we can grab those 4 words or 10 words or 20 words, however content, it's not changing the fact that it's inline, but it allows you to logically grab that content and say something about it. Right now, we're not saying anything. We're just only logically grabbing it. But we could, for instance, say that I want to change the style. I want to say that the style, right, is that I want to change the foreground color, to be yellow. And there it is. It's yellow. We can barely read it. Okay. So I can specify, or I can change maybe the background color. And say that the background color is red. So now I can highlight content, right? Or I can give it a name and maybe make it clickable. Right? If you click that particular piece of content, something will happen. Some alert will appear. Yes, I can now logically grab content, don't change its look and feel, right? But then associate some behavior or some look and feel about it. Make sense? Right. So again, div is a generic block element. Span is a generic inline element. Right. And all the other block elements or inline elements, they do some styling changes, like bold, italic, or underline. It's inline, but it changes the look and feel, right? And same thing, headings and paragraphs, right? And ULs, those are all block elements, but they add additional styling, bullets, right? Bolds and things like that. Everybody good? All right. Okay, so let's play around with the grades. Grades, let's play around with some tables. So in the grades, let's create a table here. So table, the initial intent for tables was to present tabular data, right? Where you want to have maybe a heading, right, where you might say, these are the columns of the table, right? That for instance, we have here the grades. We have a proper table, right, where each row presumably is a record. Yes, and then the columns say, that all the data in that column presumably are of the same type. Okay, the same data type, right? That they're all grades, from 0 to 100, right? They're all numeric. You won't see any strings here or dates or anything like that. Yes. So that's the intent, right? That all the elements in a row will have the same schema, right? The same meaning. Today or early on when HTML just came out, folks misused tables, and we'll show you today how to misuse it, and then never again. But just historically, we'll say what not to do, what people used to do, used to use tables for. We'll do that in a minute. So you might have here headings. So you might have things such as we have a. So this looks like we have a row, right, of headings. Although some of these have two portions, right? We have kind of like a title, and then some blurb about, out of 100 and something like that. So it looks like it's maybe looks like these are 2 rows, right? Of which these kind of like span, where maybe this content of student name spans two rows, but these have two different rows and different content in each row. So let's do that. Let's look at the first row. The first row might be TH. So row, a table row is TR for table row. And then so the table heading can have multiple rows. So we looks like we need 2 rows, right? We need 2 rows. 2 rows. And the first row is going to have several columns. The first column is student name. So student name. Interesting. And notice the TH. TH means heading, table heading. It's going to style it, a little bit more bold, right? A little bit bigger, right? Just so that the importance of this particular text, right? We have then we have maybe A1, and A1. We have A2, right? A3, and so forth, right? So let's render this. Let's see what it looks like. Okay, it doesn't look much like a table. We can make this a little more pronounced, right? If we use border 1, notice the slash through it, right? This is a deprecated attribute, and we should not be using border, but I'm going to use it anyway because I don't have CSS just yet. Right? Instead, we would use CSS for this, okay, to style it. But this allows me to quickly add, an additional border, and you can see that this is indeed a table, okay, with several columns. Also, by default, it squishes everything to by whatever size of the content that it contains, right? That it has. But we can expand a little bit by saying that we want the width to be 100%. Again, we would not use these attributes. We would instead use CSS, right? But that's next week. So let's refresh. So this now expands the entire content to take up the entire width of the screen. Everybody good? Okay. Let's see what else. So that's the first row, and also under in the second row, the first column doesn't have anything, but the second column has this blurb about out of 100. So let's have another row, okay, and we'll have the th here. We're not going to have anything there, and then all the other ones are going to just say out of 100. And that's going to be 1, 2, 3, and 4. So if we render this, there it is, out of 100. But it kind of looks weird, this name here, right, all by itself, the second row that's empty. So we could improve on that and say, well, I'm not really going to have this column for the name. Instead, what I'm going to do have is that the first cell, right, of this row is going to span. It's going to span across multiple rows. So we're going to span across multiple rows, 2 rows. So you can say how many rows do you want to span? I'm going to span 2 rows. So that it takes up both rows, and it spans across. And then the next few are just names of students, and then a couple of grades. So let's but this is already just content, the actual data, right? The actual data that I want to render. Also, notice that if I scroll, notice that the heading stays is stuck there, right? We can't do that just yet. We need CSS for that. We'll do that next week. But you can say I want my heading to be sticky, right? So that it'll stay put. So and you can scroll through the context, right? And so the content doesn't go in the heading. It goes in a separate T body. So this is the body of the actual data that we want to render, and it also has a whole bunch of rows, right? 1 row per student, and each student has a whole bunch of columns. We're going to have at least 4 columns, 1 per assignment. Yes. And so we're going to have the first column. No, this is TD, not TH. TD for data, table data, right? So this is cell data. So this is the name of user. So I'm going to go with Alice, and Alice is a 1, 2, so 4. She'll have 1 more. She's a great student. She's a straight A student. And she's aced all the assignments. So let's refresh that. But these are all grades for her. And notice again, it's by default, the content is justified to the left, right? And you can specify that too. You can say, I want alignment in the middle, on the right, but we'll do it with CSS next week. So we have Alice, and let's just copy a couple of the students. So Alice, Bob, and Charlie. Alice, Bob, and Charlie. So there's 3 students, and maybe at the bottom, you want a footer that maybe displays, cumulative data, maybe some averages, the mean, the max, the things like that, right? So that would go in the footer. So you can say tfoot, right? That might have a couple of rows. The first row might be for the average, right? And you have actual data. I'm just going to copy this data. So these are all the averages, right? And it may be a min and another row with a max. Down below, you might have, again, you can make this sticky so that only the center table body scrolls up and down, and the foot stays sticky, right? And the heading stays sticky, right? And everything in between can scroll. But we need CSS for that. So we'll revisit this next week and play around with this some more. Everybody good? Well, this is the original intent of tables. Right? The original intent is for tabular data, but this was heavily misused. When HTML there was no native support. HTML did not support ways of creating columns, of creating content with columns, such as this. Right? If we go back into the content, we see that this content contains several columns. Right? We have this navigation here is in 1 column. This list is another column. Right? The main content is its own column, and then you have the sidebar. It's its own column. See that? Well, there was no native way of doing that, right? In using plain old HTML, right? And CSS was not yet in vogue, right? It was not yet fully defined, and people weren't studying. So folks started misusing tables for this. Because I can just have this maybe just 1 row, right, and have just 4 columns, right? And I'll just put the content. My first list on the first column, this in the second column, so on and so forth. So let me show you how not to lay out pages. So let me just show you. So you could do, for instance, you might have a table here, right? And maybe one row, maybe the T body. We don't even need the heading, right? Because we only want it for layout. We have a single row and maybe just a couple of columns. Maybe how many columns we need? 1, 2, 3, 4 columns, right? So we have one column, 2, 3, 4, and then we can move each one of these pieces of content, right? We can move the canvas navigator. We can move it into the first column, right? And we can move the second, right, into the second column, right? We can move the course content into the third column and the sidebar into the last column. See that? Right. So if I now go back, right, and I refresh my index, notice that now things have been spread out across multiple columns. See that? Right. The sizing might not be quite like we want it. Right. So let's turn on the border just so that we can see where the tables are. There they are. Right. And we might want to spread this out to take up the entire screen. Right. And then we might want to play around with the sizing of this, right? Of the sizing of these columns. Maybe these sizes on the left side should be smaller, and the course content should take up most of the screen, right? So we might say that the left column, we might change it to be maybe 10% of the screen, right? And this one might be another 10% of the screen. So that leaves 80% for the rest, yes? And maybe the course content, maybe this should be bigger, maybe 70%, or maybe 75%. And then the sidebar maybe take only 5%, right? On the screen. So this now lays it out, right? So that I can, this looks more like a navigation. The course content might take up the entire screen or most of the screen because it's the most important content. And so now here I might focus then on adding this list of lists, right? Of all these different modules that have lists within them, right? Now notice how we have been working. So this is a fairly long, or if these were all hyperlinks, this might be several hundred lines of code, okay? And so maintaining this is not fun, right? Especially if you have a larger teams and somebody's responsible for the course navigator, somebody's responsible for the canvas navigator. We're all trampling each other, coming and editing this screen, right? And that's where React.js shines. You could maybe this whole list, right, may be its own component, right? Outside, and maybe it's a function that calculates this. Yes, maybe goes out to some database, right, and brings out all the actual content, and it can render this, right? That's where we're going. We want to programmatically be able to maybe logically break this out and create our own element called, Canvas Navigator. It'd be nice if we could just put all that content inside of a new element called Canvas Navigator that returns this UL. Yes, that'd be nice. All right, and that's where React.js shines. React.js promotes these best practices that whenever you see lots of stuff, hey, how about you group that inside of a function, right? And then return that as a result. So the same principles that you would apply in other software engineering endeavors, right? In any software engineering project, you might say, what, you're gonna put everything in the main function? Can't you break it out into multiple functions, multiple classes, multiple, right? And you create modules that you can reuse these things, right? And self-contained modules. And that's what React.js is going to bring in a couple of weeks. Yes? Right. But for now, we don't have that. Right. So we're gonna suffer through this and use it, do it the old way still. Okay. All right, so we have that, and I just wanted to do another example here where these are modules that are lists within lists. So let me show you that. So for instance, in the course content, we might have different modules here, right? So we have maybe module one. Module one is maybe resources. So this is maybe resources. And you have a textbook here. Textbook. We have office hours, right? Office hours. And you have week 1 and week 2. Right, so that if you render this, there's our main content of the course content, right? And then within each of these, you have other sub lists, right? Where resources, you might have a whole bunch of other stuff, syllabus and piazza and blah, 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 right? So these could be nested as follows, right? You have this resources and maybe even, maybe these could be their own headings, maybe, perhaps, right? And this could be a nested list of things, right? Where this one might be syllabus, and one of them could be piazza. The other one could be project. The other one could be GitHub, right? And these could be hyperlinks, perhaps, right? And so that's for the first one, right? And then maybe for the for week 1, right? It could also be its own subsection of nested lists, right? For week 1, and week 1 you might have HTML, you might have assignment 2, you might have let's see, what do we have for week 1? Oh, you might have reading, assignment 1. You might have slides, right? You might have videos, right? And so this looks like that, where you have a list of things, a list of lists right, as you go in there, right? Now, obviously this, somebody who has a nice, artistic eye, right, might come back and apply CSS so that this content looks like that, right? And that's an entire different set of skills, okay? There's people that only do that, you give them something as ugly as this, right? And they'll give you back something as pretty as that, right? And that's what all CSS is all about, right? And people just have careers on just making things look professional, polished, and presentable, and whereas us developers might not have as much of a artistic eye, right? And we might find that this is totally fine, right? It's totally functional. What else you want? You can click and navigate and edit your account, blah, blah, blah. Oh yeah, so let's look at the account. In the account, you might want to edit a few things, right? So you might have what? You might have let's go to the account, and in the profile, you might have be able to change your name. So this might be input, and maybe a placeholder that says a label. Let's start off with just a plain old input field. Notice that some tags have an opening tag and a closing tag. See that? And then we say that this is the body of that tag. Yes, right? And most elements are like that. Most tags are like that, right? The body has a body. That's the body of the body tag. This is the body of the title tag. The body of the HTML tag is this whole thing. Yes, right? So bodies allow you to nest things inside, whether they are just plain text or other elements inside. Yes, like UL has a body that contains a whole bunch of LIs, align items. Yes, okay. But some tags don't have a body, right? Input doesn't have any body. Okay, and notice that it still has to have a closing, right? Yeah, and the way you close elements that don't have a body is by adding a slash at the end. See that? Right? So this tag is both an opening tag and its own closing tag. It self-closes, right, by putting the slash at the end. See that? Unlike elements, right, closing tags have the slash at the beginning as a closing. See that? But this one is at the beginning an opening, and at the end is a closing. Right? So it's a self-closing tag, we say, and it has no body. Okay. So this is the name. Let's see how this renders. So if I go to account, there it is, name. So by default, right, input fields and text render as inline. See that? So there it is, name, and then but we want it to render right, vertically. So I need to make it behave like a block. There's a couple ways I can explicitly say that this is a div. I can say that. So that adds vertical spacing, right? It forces the vertical spacing. Yes. And what else? So name. Say I have one a biography. So bio. Say I have bio here. Biography. Same thing. I want the say a text area. Oops. Text area. If I refresh. Notice that also text area wants to be inline. Yes. But I want it to behave like a block. Again, I could use a div, right? Surrounded by a div. But a simpler way is that I could just put a break. Right? BR creates a break in the inline, right? It just adds vertical spacing. Yes, and forces everything to go next line and to the left. So that causes the left there. Make sense? Right. I might use breaks also to add some vertical spacing so that these are not so close together, right? So that name and biography put some line between them, right? Or I can use use that, or I can also use a ruler, a horizontal ruler, right? That adds a nice rule all the way across. Yes. And breaks up the content pretty nicely. Also, it's useful that we add some placeholders. Placeholders give me a hint of what are you asking me to type in there. So I might put something like John Doe. Right? Give you an example of what I'm going to write in there. So not only your first name, not only your last name, but both. Your first name and last name, right? And so notice that it's grayed out, and not until even if I focus on it, right, it's still there. Still give me an example of what we're expecting me to type. When I start typing, it goes away, right? But it comes back if I remove everything. It comes back, right? But it's no data, no actual data. Another way that I can give you a hint of what do you want me to type in there is I can put a tooltip, and tooltips are added with tooltip. No tooltip. It's title, no tooltip, right? It'll be in the quiz, right? It says, how do you add a tooltip? And one of the wrong answers will be tooltip. Okay, so you use it, you add a tooltip using title. Title gives you a hint as you hover over the content, right? So please type your first and last name. Okay. Now if I hover over it, right, you have this little blurb that tells you what you want me to do with that, right? Obviously, the one of the ways that I can tell you how to do something is by actually giving you a label, right? With this label here. The actual data, I can actually give you a default initial data, maybe something that I went and fetched from the database, right? And I want to display the current value of that field, right? So that you can then edit it. Right, so this might be, I can do that with the value attribute. This might say Alice Wonderland. Right, so notice that it pre-populates the content, and then it allows you to just keep editing or whatever. Right, if I remove it, the placeholder comes back. Okay. What else? Notice that this input is pretty long. See all these attributes? It's kind of like spilling over across the edge of the screen, and it makes it harder to read. Okay? So a good practice is to don't do that, right? Break this out either at the 80 character mark, or even better, each one of these attributes split into a into its own line, right? Into its own line, so that just like source code. This is just like source code, right? You would put each line of statement in its own line, right? It makes it much easier to read, right? And some would go beyond and actually put the closing tag, closing element in its own line as well, right? I think it's a little bit too much, but yeah, some people like that, put in its own line as well. Whatever you make it easier for others to read your content, right? The better. What else? Another thing is that as I click on it, notice that it takes focus when I click on the input field. Notice if I click on the name, nothing happens. Right? When I click on the name, so which is fine. When you have clickable areas that are large like this, but it would make it easier if this were a phone or a tablet, that you increase the size, the clickable size, as much as possible. Right. So one way is that we can use say width. I would say width equals 100. But you would not actually do this with width. You would use it with CSS, right? So don't use width. Instead, we're going to show you how to do this with CSS next week. Things such as you can say style with 100%. Something like that. But again, we'll do this next week. So this definitely will look much better on a small screen, on a phone screen, something like that. So that it's easier to increase the clickable area as much as possible, so that with your finger you can click at. But even the label, it'd be nice if you click on the label, make it as big as possible. So what we could do is that we can wrap label around this by this name. Okay, notice that it doesn't do anything. It's an inline element. Okay, it doesn't style it, but it allows you to give it some behavior. It allows you to associate this text with the input field, right? So if I give it a unique identifier and I say this is the username, okay, I can say that this label is associated. It's for, right? It's for, and it gives me all the options. What are all the unique identifiers? So I can select username and say, yes, this label is for that particular input field over there. Right? And what this does is that it adds the behavior that if I click on the name, the associated input field takes focus. Right? And again, this is great for phones, tablets, where clicking on little small text or small fields is it's just challenging. So whatever you can make it so that it's larger and easier to interact, it's a better experience. But it's much more important when you have really small pieces of content. So for instance, if I say, right, if I have a favorite book, right, and you have several radio buttons, right, where you have inputs of type radio, right, and you have tune or whatever. You have several what other books interest you? What books? Doom Science. Roar of the Doom. Whatever. So you have these radio buttons, and especially in small screens, right? It might be very small to click on these radio buttons. It's a pain, right? So here is a good idea to associate this text, right, with the input field, right? And there's a couple ways. One of the ways is that you can give it a unique identifier, right, and say that this is Dune or book Dune, whatever, and then say that this is the label. Right? You can say this is the label, right, for book Dune, so that not only now if I click on it, I can also click on the refresh. I can click on the text, and then the radio button gets clicked, right? That's a good practice. Make it as big as possible. Okay. Another thing that another way that you could do the same exact thing is that instead of putting the label here and using for, right, which forces you to use an ID, another way of doing it is that you can surround the whole thing with a label. Okay, so this does the same exact effect. Right? You can click on Lord of the Rings, right, and then the radio gets selected. Not the other ones. See that? None of the other ones do that. Right? Only these two. But wait a minute. Radio buttons are supposed to be mutually exclusive. Right? Notice that it allowed me to select two favorite buttons, favorite books. This should be mutually exclusive. And the way that radio buttons can be mutually exclusive is that they have to be grouped and say that, hey, all these radio buttons are of the same group. I can have multiple groups, like favorite book, favorite color, favorite car brand, whatever, right? But they're all in different groups, and in each group they're mutually exclusive. So to group them, we use a name. So the name, and the name would be, Fab favorite book. Right? And if they have all the same name, if they all have the same name, okay, and I refresh, now they're mutually exclusive. If I click one, it unselects the other. See that? And that's how you group together all these radio buttons. All right, excellent. So this is I had so far. Yeah, if you could start working on A2. Looks like most of you have already submitted A1, and if you get going on assignment, we'll head to that. Right? Excellent. Thank you, everyone. Thank you.